Hey guys, sorry that it's taken so long to come out with this review. The first video got screwed up and I couldn't fix it, and it's just difficult for some reason to find working images. For some reason, when I was trying to do it today, it took like 20 minutes to get images because the links were broken. But without further ado, let's get into Fallout New Vegas. Well, a reaction review of Fallout New Vegas. So the Fallout games are, well, they're widely known for being some of the most kind of philosophical, deep game series ever created. I've never played any of the originals. I've tried once or twice. I admit when I started playing video games, it was around the N64 era, and I'm just not used to playing things that dated, I guess you could say. And I just find the interface and it just kind of grueling. But from my understanding, the old ones are very in depth, and they were kind of some of the first games to really kind of stress what video games could do in terms of story and narrative and to kind of explore political ideas. So that's all interesting. So the first game I played was Fallout 3, and maybe I'll do a reaction review of it, but Fallout 3 is kind of a mess. The game I liked a lot better was Fallout New Vegas, and it's the only Fallout game I played that I've actually kind of liked. I thought Fallout 4 was pretty bad, and Fallout 3 was kind of a snooze fest that just went on forever. Fallout New Vegas, though, from my understanding, was made by the development team who made the original Fallouts, and as such, it had a much better story. So, kind of my interpretation of Fallout New Vegas is it's kind of looking at the different ways that people are responding to the kind of existential questions of the post-nuclear world. Kind of one of the core themes in the game is they frequently talk about the old world, perhaps more than in the other games, more kind of in an era philosophical sense. Probably my favorite DLC was Old World Blues, because the whole thing was about how should people relate to the world that came before. Should the memory of America just be cast away in favor of something new? Should we try to return to the past? Should we be focused on the future? Can man ever learn from his mistakes? Etc. And so I think, kind of to a certain extent, the factions represent different ways of answering these questions, different ways of responding to questions of human nature and kind of the flow of history. I think it's very interesting because not a lot of games really have factions that are this clearly delineated and that have this much obvious, I guess, kind of diversity of opinion between them. So I think the easiest faction to start with, and what's kind of the most readily recognizable to new fans of the series, is the New California Republic. Now, the New California Republic is built on the principle of trying to reclaim what was best about the old world. They've more or less brought back the Constitution. They have an elected Congress. They have a president. They have an army. They have welfare systems. It's probably the most similar of any of the factions to pre-war America. Kind of the goals of the New California Republic are strength, peace, and prosperity. While there's people who complain about it because it's expansionist and because it has become kind of a plutocracy, in contrast to a lot of other countries, kind of ideas like human rights, making sure everyone can eat, imposing law and order like not having random violence. That sort of thing is all kind of core features of the way they view the world. They want to bring back civilization. They kind of want to make America America again and kind of rebuild what was lost. And so their concerns are conquering more territory, wiping out bandits, getting more resources to improve the lives of their citizens, etc. And my guess is they eventually want to restore the United States of America under their leadership. So a lot of people in these circles really hate the NCR. They say, well, they're just Democrats, they're liberals, they're just going to continue society down the path to degeneracy. They haven't learned anything from the failures of the past, and their entire approach to the future is completely flawed. They're just perpetuating an endless cycle. Now, while there's some truth to that, I think more what the NCR believes is, to a certain extent, what I believe, that history isn't really cyclical. Um, it's not really something that you can necessarily control. I mean, you can influence the stream a bit, but you can't fundamentally alter it. Time just goes on, life goes on, history goes on, and it's not necessarily worth it to try and completely just change everything. They doubt that it's possible. So the NCR, I think, is kind of, their philosophy is not to have an abstract view of history, and to just say, okay, the world's ended, we have to make the best of it. We're going to rebuild. We're going to bring back technology. We're going to bring back responsible government. We're going to try and improve things for the average person, because just that system, whatever its flaws were, did largely function and did largely ensure prosperity for most of the people in the world. In America. So I think that's kind of their perspective. They kind of look at Caesar's Legion and the Brotherhood of Steel and a lot of the other people as LARPing and kind of creating a world that excludes the vast majority of humanity. So they kind of want to bring humanity together in the United States under one kind of collective banner that everyone can be part of. So my view of NCR, as I said, is the idea that history doesn't necessarily have a set flow. It's not necessarily cyclical. It's not necessarily linear. Things just change, and you have to try to adapt to the changes and do the best you can with what you've been given. So I kind of view the NCR, despite kind of a lot of their rhetoric, as just kind of being a purely pragmatic faction that's driven by what they believe to be the best interests of their people and their state, rather than overarching abstract ideals that a lot of the other factions are found upon. So I always kind of like the NCR. I don't really get the hate they receive, because their citizens are much better off and enjoy a much higher, safer standard of living than pretty much anyone else in the Fallout world. And their country, despite its overextension, seems to be pretty stable. The worst that could happen is they overextend themselves and they lose some of their outlying areas. The core on the coast, though, seems pretty well put together. Now, the Enclave is interesting because they're so mysterious. All we really know about them is they are the successors to the original United States of America, the direct successors. The original Congress, the original president, the original senators. Most high-ranking Americans withdrew before and in the aftermath of the nuclear war, and their plan was to kind of sit it out in the meantime and wait until they could reemerge and basically just restore America to what it was. So, in an extent, they're even more kind of dedicated to old world principles than any other faction. What it's kind of hard to say what exactly they see as the fault of the old world. The Enclave is kind of interesting. The closest thing to an ideology they have is purity. That is purity of blood and purity of genetics. It's not in a racial sense. It's in a genetic sense. They kind of consider mutants and the people of the post-apocalypse as being a different species altogether. I think kind of the way you can describe the Enclave is, it's not even that they're trying to bring back the old world. They are the old world. The old world never ended for them. The Cataclysm may have changed kind of their reach and power, but they're largely the same as they were from before. So they don't even really share the point of view of the other factions who are trying to say what went wrong and how can they build a different future or kind of rebuild the past. They are just living in the past. The past never ended from them. The war did not fundamentally change who they were or what they believe in. And so they're very anachronistic. They talk about Congress, they talk about the president, they talk about all these things that just seem to be a myth to most people, but to them are just things that they've had as part of their lives, as just kind of integral parts of their daily existence for the last, I forget what the timeline is exactly in Fallout. So in essence, their perspective is all these other factions, the NCR, the mutants, the Caesar's Legion, everybody are just merely invaders. They view them as people who came in, they're Johnny come latelys, they're occupying the land that is rightfully theirs, because they view it as they never stopped being the government of the United States. America's still a sovereign nation, the borders are still the same, and you have all these people who are in direct rebellion against the legitimate government of the United States. So I think that's kind of how you have to understand the Enclave. That they haven't changed since the war. The war hasn't fundamentally altered who they are. To the members of the Enclave, life more or less went on, albeit in military facilities, like it did before the Cataclysm. And so they're kind of the most alien and the most kind of xenophobic faction of all of them, and just kind of the most fundamentally different. Next, we have Mr. House. In my opinion, Mr. House views the fundamental failure of the old world as being one of leadership, emotion, and competency, rather than anything, I suppose you could say, particularly ideological. Mr. House is not really an ideological person. If anything, he seems to have disdain for ideology and disdain for making decisions based on emotions at all. He's basically the ultimate technocrat, and that's the way he runs New Vegas. Everything he does is just based on optimizing wealth, optimizing New Vegas, optimizing his own position. And kind of what he desires, and this kind of comes from his days as being a CEO, is to kind of be a paternal aristocrat. But I think what he sees as the failure of the pre-world is not only were their leaders prone to making irrational emotional decisions like pursuing nuclear war, like excessive concerns over freedom, excessive concerns over honor, or kind of any of these abstract notions, but I think he sees the issue as being that there was never kind of a reliable, predictable regime. In political science terms, there was always different presidents who would come in. There was always different Congresses. Over time, people die and things keep changing, and nothing can be predictable. Periods of prosperity and competency are always followed by periods of incompetent leadership, and anything that is built is destroyed, and often destroyed worse than the amount that was built up. So his solution to the problems of the old world was he was going to live forever. So he's hooked up to a life support machine that will basically allow him to live forever. And he views himself as a man who is completely dispassionate, is completely only governed by reason and logic, and he will be the eternal paternal aristocrat governing New Vegas. And the situation will always be reliable. People will always know what to expect, and there won't be periods of decline. Everything will just kind of be evened out, and if there's development and change, it'll be directed by the will of one man. And he even doesn't have a government around him. His government is just him and his security trons. So you have one man with absolute power, but the person is dispassionate and rather benevolent, and he will just rule for all time. Thus, he kind of views that he has, through living forever, created an end of history and an end of the problems of the past. I think Mr. House's perspective actually does make a fair amount of sense. Especially since, if you think about it, someone might say, well, the problem with Mr. House is how would you implement this on a wider scale? How would you find men of his caliber who are not sadistic or really fanatical to rule as kind of benevolent autocrats? I think that's kind of his point, is that he views himself as being unique, or being one of the very limited number of people who can rule competently without falling into kind of rampant corruption. So I think that's kind of Mr. House's perspective, is to just stop playing the game, to just kind of, I guess, transcend history. That history just doesn't matter anymore because the flow of history is caused by waxing and waning. So if we can have an eternal government that always stays the same, then we can solve kind of the issues of emotion, of war, of fanaticism, and just have a kind of a post-historical society. Then we have Caesar's Legion, which is interesting. This wasn't meant to be satirical, or I wasn't going to do jokes really, but I mean, let's be honest. Caesar's Legion is basically what Pohl would do after a nuclear apocalypse. They're a bunch of guys who run around in Roman armor, throwing javelins at people despite guns being invented. They have like a LARPy neo-pagan religion where they worship Mars. There's some Randy who's their leader. They've kind of just become completely anachronistic. Women wear 3D women wear slave collars. Everyone's adopted like LARPy screen names. It's basically if Pohl, like I said, it's if Pohl became an army in a post-apocalyptic setting. So the wiki describes Caesar's Legion as being ultra-reactionary. And I think that's a good way to describe Caesar's Legion. They are ultra-reactionaries. They fundamentally reject every aspect of the old world. They view that the problem of the old world as not just being that it was degenerate, not just being that it democracy was a mistake. They more or less believe all of modern civilization was a complete mistake. So in Caesar's Legion, people live extremely short, brutal lives. Modern medicine is largely rejected outside of the founder. Most of them won't even use guns because it's seen as interfering kind of with their warrior spirit. So people in Caesar's Legion is an absolute kind of oriental despotism. All members of the Legion, with the exception of Caesar, are slaves to Caesar. They're his property. He can kill them and use them as he wishes. And kind of the belief is by removing anything that would make humanity soft, by creating this environment where life is short and brutal, he's giving people purpose. The purpose is to serve Caesar himself and to serve Mars. They've kind of taken the most kind of hardcore, hard edge aspects of traditional society and just implemented them and rejected every single aspect of modernity. So the issue with Caesar's Legion is in getting rid of everything soft. I think they've kind of gotten rid of a lot of the core parts of humanity. They have no compassion. They have no kind of affection. Even to a certain extent, camaraderie is sacrificed in favor of just strength at all costs. It's a very life is nasty, brutish, and short. Women are property. Everyone is basically property of Caesar. Who Caesar really kind of reminds me of is Darth Krayt with the one Sith. Now, Darth Krayt dispensed with the rule of two and even kind of traditional ideas of the Sith. And what he said is, we will have the one Sith. The Sith will be the Sith Order, and the Sith Order will be me, because I am a unique man of vision, and I know what's best for the galaxy. So all kind of individual selfishness will be put away. We will maintain all kind of the brutality, all the kind of methods of the Sith, but the only one who is truly a Sith will be me, and the rest of the galaxy and the rest of the Order will be my property. And I think that's kind of what Caesar was going for when he founded the Legion. Kind of an idea like that. So Caesar's primary goal is to kind of return humanity to this pure state, and he kind of views anyone outside of himself to be an existential threat because they threaten the ideological purity of the Legion. If they get defeated by a technologically superior foe, it will delegitimize him. So their only kind of way they can survive is to destroy everyone else and to kind of do away with technology and just bring world completely to a pre-modern society. So Caesar's Legion is kind of reactionary, but it's also based on kind of a reconstructed lie that's applied to a people who have no connection to ancient Rome. But they are an interesting faction. It's kind of a pity that they're so unsympathetic in the game. They're kind of a bunch of sadistic psychopaths. So last but certainly not least is the Brotherhood of Steel. The Brotherhood of Steel, from my understanding, is the remnants of the U.S. Army, who after the war, keep in mind America has one of the largest armies on Earth, and a large percentage of the population, compared to a lot of other countries, has served in the Army, particularly in the South. So after the war, the surviving soldiers got their families and retreated into their military bases. They built their own communities, and they more or less separated themselves. And because it was founded by military people, the Brotherhood of Steel is a military order as well as kind of a state. And I think how they view the kind of the primary problem of the old world is kind of to a similar degree the problems with democracy described in Starship Troopers. That you had democracy where the average person didn't have honor, they didn't have camaraderie, they weren't willing to die for what they believed in. And so you had a world governed by selfish people who had no concept of the greater good. They had no concept of honor. And as such, their societies were inherently degenerate. So the Brotherhood of Steel is a non-democratic society. It's entirely based on honor, on camaraderie, on hierarchy. They have a very strict rank chain of command. They have very strict rules for everything. And that's more or less how it functions. You get the impression that the Brotherhood of Steel has virtually no crime, virtually no treason. It's basically what's called a stratocracy. A stratocracy is a military government that's been legitimized, if that makes any sense. Like a military dictatorship is when the country technically has some other form of government, but the army just happens to control society. So those often tend to be a lot more oppressive and a lot more kind of arbitrary. Whereas in like a stratocracy, all government positions are controlled by members of the army, but that's either constitutional or just kind of the base form of the government. So while we don't have too many examples of that in history, if we did, I think it would be a lot more orderly, a lot less kind of oppressive. And the Brotherhood of Steel has been around long enough that most people are pretty happy with it. Even though many of them live rather Spartan lifestyles, every member of the Brotherhood of Steel has access to medicine, to clean water, to food, to their own rooms normally, a place to sleep, and relative safety. Sure, they have to do missions and they have to fight in wars and stuff, but by and large, the standard of living they have and that their families have is better than pretty much anywhere else in the world. They're also the most pure because they spend a lot of their time. They have proper access to medicine and they live in radioactive shielded houses. So I'm just going to talk about the main Brotherhood of Steel, not really the East Coast one, as that's kind of completely different. But they kind of are just disinterested in the post-war world. They want to build their own societies based on discipline, based on technology, based on honor, and they want nothing to do with the common mass of humanity. They don't want democracy. They don't want human rights. They don't want any of that other stuff. They've built a society of hierarchy and order. They've built a society where eventually, through technology, the average person will have a tremendous standard of living, and where they are capable of defending their way of life and their principles through force against all enemies, foreign and domestic. So I think you can largely see the Brotherhood of Steel, at least from my reading. I've only played 3, 4 in New Vegas, so I don't know what they were like in the earlier games. But I kind of see them as an isolationist country that's completely xenophobic and is completely kind of disinterested in what the plebs are doing, is disinterested in the chaotic, brutal outside world full of people with no honor and people who prey upon one another. So, yeah, I mean, the Brotherhood of Steel is a military order. That's what they are. They're a military order. Their form of government is military. And that's, I don't really know what else I can say about them. But it's an interesting game series. You have a lot of different factions. You have a lot of different ideas and different theories as to how the world should be run, what went wrong, and how to kind of face the aftermath of it. So that's kind of my reaction review of Fallout New Vegas. I hope you enjoyed it. More content to